drivetrain wear, broken chains and the odd snapped cassette. All things that we've seen on e-mountain bikes in their short 10-year existence. And it got me thinking, do we really need 12, 11 gears on our e-mountain bikes? Could the magic number be just 8? Running less gears on an e-mountain bike is in fact old news. SRAM did it 5 or 6 years ago with the SRAM EX1 group set. Now this was a steel cassette body with a wide ratio, perfect for e-mountain bikes, but we don't see that as stock on too many bikes, unfortunately. And of course there is Shimano with their recent link glide system. Now this looks to increase that durability of those drivetrain items even more. So can you do the same stuff on an 8-speed bike as you can on an 11 and 12-speed bike? Well, it depends. It depends on the motor, it depends on the chainring size, and of course your skill levels. There's no doubt that a 52-tooth rear cassette can get you up some of those crazy steep tech climbs, but I'm not so sure you need such a huge range of gears. And of course, swapping out your drivetrain to an 8-speed setup isn't going to have any adverse effects on your motor whatsoever. The motor will be doing exactly the same work as an 11 or 12-speed setup. So what then are the drawbacks of going 8-speed on your e-mountain bike? Well, I can think of 3 main ones. Number 1 being the lack of clutch mechs available on the market in 8-speed. I mean, if you're riding off-road on those downhill technical sections, you may experience a little bit more chain slap than you would do on a clutch mech, and you do have that possibility of dropping a chain. Second has to be the gear ratios. Of course, across a 12-speed cassette, you have a lot more room to fit more cogs in, and therefore the increments between each teeth is going to be less. On an 8-speed cassette, you're going to experience quite big jumps when you shift up and down the cassette. And lastly, it has to be the availability of some of these 8-speed parts. Things like a narrow wide chainring for 8-speed is really hard to find compared to something like the 11 or 12-speed version, which is super common everywhere. But it is out there, it just takes some locating. So what then are the advantages of an 8-speed setup? Well, firstly, you've got a bigger chain on there, which should be stronger. And of course, it's going to clear that mud away when you're riding in the bad conditions. And lastly, it's the replacement cost of all these parts. It's a lot less than an 11 or a 12-speed setup, and that's what I like. So let's take a look at the parts that you're going to need to swap out that 11 or 12-speed to an 8-speed setup. Well, there's 2 things that are going to make your life a little bit easier. One is going to be the free hub body on your hub. Now for an 8-speed setup, the only free hub body that will work with this is the Shimano HG or Hyperglide free hub body that is splined. It will not fit SRAM XD or Shimano Micro Spline either. The other thing that you're going to need is the spider at front. Now for an 8-speed setup, you will need a 104 BCD spider that chainring is going to mount onto. If you've got a 1-piece chainring and spider mounted, you will not get that to fit an 8-speed system. And the cost of these items is going to be dependent on the system that you're running. For instance, on these Mavic wheels, if I need to replace the free hub body, that's going to be about £45. And for the cranks, if I didn't have that 104 BCD spider already on my Specialized, that would cost me, again, about £45 to replace. Then you're going to have to replace that whole drivetrain system. Now for a shifter, I'm going to be using a SRAM X4 trigger shifter, and that comes in at $10.99. And for the cassette out the back, now this one is from Amazon, it's an 1136, and that cost £35.99. And then the chain to link it all together, 8-speed version from KMC is costing $13.99. And then for shifting duties out back, I've got an 8-speed derailleur, the SRAM X4, £21. Then on the free hub, you're going to need a spacer just to tweak that gap down from the 11-speed to the 8-speed. This is 1.5 millimeters, and I've got a whole selection here from Amazon, and that is $8.99 for the spacers. Then the chainring up front, you want a narrow wide version on there to keep your chainring, and this one is coming from Box Components at £20. Then you're going to need some bolts to hold that chainring on, £5. And a gear cable just to freshen things up and ease that installation process. That comes in at £5.95. So surprisingly cheap there. So let's take a look at how those prices compare to the original setup of the 11-speed kit that came off of this bike. So kicking things off, the shifter, that comes from SRAM at £45. On this bike, I had the SRAM PG 1130 cassette, and that comes in at £80. Shifting wise, the derailleur was a SRAM GX long cage, and that will cost £110. To keep it all linked up is the chain, and that is from KMC at £30. And powering along is the Praxis chainring up front, and that comes in at £40. So £305 total for that original 11-speed setup. So totting up all those figures between the 11-speed and this 8-speed setup, well, the difference comes in at £188 and 9 pence. £305 then to replace all the items on this 11-speed setup. But in reality, if you're just going to refresh the drivetrain on your e-bike by means of replacing the chain, cassette and chainring, it's going to cost you £150. Not a lot of cash, but you need to bear in mind that an 11-speed setup with an 1142 cassette isn't that common on an e-bike these days. So let's go take a look at something a little bit newer. So let's take a look at some of the latest offerings on a lot of the new school e-mountain bike tech. Now this is my Canyon Spectral on, and it's got a full XT drivetrain on this bike. So let's take a look at the cost to replace the drivetrain items on this bike. So the chain comes in at £45, the cassette £150, and the chainring £65. In total, £260. Then if we take a look at SRAM's offering for their 12-speed Eagle setup, it's going to cost you £80 for a chain, £350 for a cassette, and £75 for a chainring, totaling £505. So there we go, potentially a lot of cash to be saved by running this 8-speed setup compared to that 11 or 12-speed, particularly if you're going to be replacing those drivetrain items, say 3 or 4 times a year. You could be saving hundreds, if not thousands of pounds by switching over to that 8-speed. But how does it compare out on the trail? Well, that is something we're going to be doing in another video, 8-speed versus 12-speed out on the trail. But I'm really curious as to see how much benefit or, disadvantages this system is going to give me. Is it going to be easier on my wallet or possibly harder on my legs? Time to find out. But let us know if you've enjoyed today's video, because there's a thumbs up. Get involved in the comments if you've got any questions or anything you want to know about this 8-speed setup. Don't forget to subscribe to us here on EMBN, and we shall see you soon.